Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
He is the only golfer to win 3 straight U.S. Open championships, and if it weren't for a 4th place finish in 1902, he would have won 5 in a row. Not even Ben Hogan, Jack Nicklaus, or Tiger Woods ever won 3 straight U.S. Open championships. Yet, when the name Willie Anderson is mentioned, few in the world of golf have ever heard of him. Next on Sports Forgotten Heroes, Willie Anderson.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. I sure hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as I'm producing them. It's been a lot of fun so far, and the stories we've heard, the personalities we've learned about, and the guests we've had have been fantastic. And today's no different. Joining me on today's show is Tony Parker. A little more soft-spoken than many of my previous guests, Tony is the historian at the World Golf Hall of Fame and Museum in St. Augustine, Florida. As always, before we get to today's podcast, just a little bit of housekeeping. First, a big thank you to Henry R. from New Jersey and Jack K. from Las Vegas for their continued support. If you'd like to support Sports Forgotten Heroes, please visit our website, sportsfh.com. That's sportsfh.com. There, you can learn how to show your support, sponsor a show, or even learn how to ask a question of a future guest. We have some super guests lined up over the next several weeks. So if you'd like to find out more, visit sportsfh.com. Follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on Facebook or on Twitter at SportsFHeroes. I'd also like to thank my friends at Hearthcast and Hungry Cliff for their continued support and guidance as well. Now, without further ado, here's my interview with Tony Parker about one of golf's and sports' forgotten heroes, Willie Anderson. As we head towards golf's final major and look back on the year in golf, I think it's fair to say that the game has taken a significant turn when it comes to a single golfer dominating the fairways. Think about it. The game has evolved. There was a time when Bobby Jones dominated the fairways. Then there was Walter Hagen and Gene Sarazen. Through the 40s and 50s, the headlines were grabbed by Sam Snead and Byron Nelson and, of course, Ben Hogan. And then Arnold Palmer came along, turned the game into must-watch TV, and he was soon joined by Jack Nicklaus and then Lee Trevino and Tom Watson. More recently, you had Greg Norman and Nick Faldo, and of course, Tiger Woods. But over the last 5 years or so, household names have not necessarily won major tournaments. Heck, Brooks Koepka won this year's U.S. Open, hardly a household name. Winning just one major tournament, for some, is a career. Paul Azinger only has one major. Same with Tom Kite, Corey Pavin, and Jim Furyk. So, how is it that a guy can win 4 U.S. Open championships and be the only golfer in history to win 3 in a row and not be a household name? How is it that you can win 4 U.S. Open championships and most golf fans have never even heard of your name? On this edition of Sports Forgotten Heroes, along with Tony Parker, historian at the World Golf Hall of Fame and Museum in St. Augustine, Florida, we're going to tell you about the only man to ever win 3 consecutive U.S. Open championships and one of only 4 men to win 4, the others being Bobby Jones, Ben Hogan, and Jack Nicklaus. Today on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to look back on the career of Willie Anderson. And joining me now is Tony Parker. Tony, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes.
Glad to be part with you.
So first, tell me about what you do at the World Golf Hall of Fame and Museum in general.
Well, that's an awful big question. Well, I'm a historian here, so I'm one who helps and write all the history. We archive the history of the game here and the greats the people who've made it great. But my job is to tell the story and to share the story of, as you say, some of the forgotten heroes and the history of the game of golf. And of course, we have 35,000 square feet of exhibition space here in the museum. So we fill that with artifacts and mainly stories. I'm a storyteller. Plus, I get to answer a lot of questions from a lot of people who come in here or call or email about certain aspects of the history of the game. And so I'm kind of always about talking about the history of the game and what it is and what it means. So here we go.
All right. That sounds great, and I'm really looking forward to this. So on this podcast, Willie Anderson. Most fans of Sports Forgotten Heroes have likely never even heard of him. What made him such a great golfer, especially when it came to playing in the U.S. Open?
Well, I'll tell you, he took up the game quite early. At the age of 11, he was a caddy over in North Berwick in Scotland, which is where he's from. Then he was an apprentice club maker, as most pros were at the time. And at age 16, he immigrated to the United States and took the job as a pro at Misquahumacut Golf Course in Rhode Island. In 1898, he is named pro at Baltusrol. So he's a young man, but he's already known for the quality of his game and the quality of his swing. He was a compact individual, strong shoulders. He had what we call the St. Andrews swing, which is a little bit more of a flat swing, with a Varden grip where you had the finger overlapping. But he was a player. Didn't miss plays.
Let me ask you this. Obviously, no one listening ever saw him play. Can you tell me about his game? What were his strengths and weaknesses? What part of his game was his strongest, and what part was his weakest?
Well, I mean, that's kind of hard to say, because if you listen to certain people, Gene Saracen was asked one time about how would he get out of a bunker, and Saracen said, well, Willie Anderson never got in a bunker. So the quality of his shots, I mean, he was straight down the fairway, and the beauty of his game was he was proficient with all types of equipment. I mean, he's the only player to win the U.S. Open using two different types of balls: the old gutta percha, or the gutty, which he used in 1901 when he won. And then in 1903, he used the Haskell ball, the first rubber core wound ball. So, you know, he adapted his game. And it's funny, his personality was one. When he was on the golf course, you couldn't tell if he was playing good or bad. He just never showed any emotion. Of course, off the golf course, a completely different story. But on the golf course, he was all about the game. And to be honest with you, if you read some of the comments that writers made at the time, there was no weakness of his game. If there was any at all, it would be in his putting. But from tee to green, no, they said he was as good as anybody who ever played the game.
So let's examine that a little bit further. He played, the gutta percha ball, which we've all heard about, but he also played clubs that aren't a part of golf today. Everybody plays wedges and hybrids, but they used mashies and brassies. Tell me about the equipment that was used back then.
Right. Okay. Well, you're talking about hickory shafted clubs and iron or steel heads on the irons as such. The putters were either hardwood or iron or, believe it or not, aluminum. And they were more like mallet putters, those were. But you had persimmon heads and hickory shafts. You could work the ball. Usually no more than 7 clubs in your bag, because of the torque, you could really shape the ball right to left any way you wanted to work it. And I don't want to say a slower swing, because these guys hit powerful, but more controlled swings, let's put it that way. I'll throw out something that I'm sure your listeners have probably never heard. Nowadays you see Arnold Palmer's name on golf clubs, or you see Jack Nicklaus' name on golf clubs. Well, Willie Anderson was the very first individual to have his autograph on Woods, Worthington golf clubs. So he was the first example of autograph clubs in America. That was Willie Anderson. So at the time, he was not an unknown. He was very well known. But as you say, his legacy has been overtaken by Bobby Jones, Francis Wilmette, Gene Saracen, Ben Hogan. All the way to Walter Hagen. But he was the guy who started it all, and he absolutely dominated when he played. Now, not only did he win 4 U.S. Opens, but there was another competition that was considered a major at the time.
The Western. Yeah, the Western.
Won 4 of those as well.
Why do you think we overlook Willie Anderson?
I don't know. He moved around quite a bit. He was pro at 10 different golf clubs in the space of 14 years. He died very young. He was 31 years old when he passed away. But then again, he was right at the turn of the century when you have golf becoming really popular. Amateurs are much more in vogue than the professionals. Professionals considered pretty much the working men as such. And so you have him who wins, and he was an outstanding golfer, but short-lived. Kind of like Bobby Jones in the sense that, Bobby retired when he was 28, but he was still a presence. Well, after Willie died in 1910, then you have the immediate rise of Francis Wilmette in 1913, and Willie is overlooked, and he's forgotten.
Interesting. He won his first U.S. Open in 1901 at the Myopia Hunt Club near Boston. But it wasn't easy. After 72 holes, he was tied with Alex Smith, so a playoff was to take place. But unlike today's game, the tournament was put on hold a few days so the members of Myopia could play during the weekend. Tell me about how tournaments were scheduled and played back then, and tell me about the playoff and the fact that Anderson had dug himself such a deep hole, but later would pull out a most improbable victory.
Well, he did. In 1901, he was 5 strokes down with 5 holes to play, and he comes back and he shoots 4-4-4-4-4 to defeat Alex Smith, who actually came in second not only at Myopia in 1903, but also at Myopia in 1905. Came in second to Willie Anderson, but he made a great comeback from there, and just consistent. Like I say, he was a determined individual, I guess would be the nice way to put it. And I think Willie Anderson, it wasn't so much that he enjoyed the win so much, is that he hated to lose. And so when a charge was needed, he made a charge. 1902 was tough for him. He went into the final hole 1 stroke in the lead, and the gentleman, Joe Lloyd, actually eagled the 18th to beat him by 1 stroke on the last hole.
So he could have actually won 5 in a row.
Exactly right. That's interesting because from 1897 to 1910, he won the U.S. Open 4 times, 1 time second place, 1 time third place, 2 times fourth place, 3 times fifth place. So 11 out of the 14, he was in the top 5. That is not bad. That's domination.
True domination. What was it like to play golf back then? And I mean in the sense of being a touring professional, especially for a guy like Anderson, who it appears as if that's what he wanted to do, but he also had to work to make a living. So he was a club professional as well. What was life like back then for a golf professional?
It was a golf professional, and there's I draw a real clear distinction between professional golfer and golf professional.
Exactly.
I think Walter Hagen was the first American professional golfer. He made his living playing golf. But before that, because there wasn't that much in prize money, you're talking first place might be $150. But again, $150 in 1901 is a pretty substantial amount. But they still had to live, and so they would do that by becoming a head pro, by teaching golfers. And remember, at that time, it's just when we call it the golden age. That's when golf is just taking off in America. A lot of golf courses, St. Andrews Golf Club in Yonkers, New York is considered the oldest continuous club, 1888. So we're talking within roughly the first decade of golf really taking off in America. You've got 5 or 6 golf clubs. By 1898, there's a dozen or so, and then it's really going. So you have these Scottish immigrants coming over, which Willie Anderson was one. Their main thing was making golf clubs for those who were coming into the game, and then teaching them how to play. And for Willie, like I say, he moved around quite a bit. But the wintertime, he usually came down to Florida, and he'd do a lot of exhibition matches and spent time down here teaching folks who would actually come south for the winter, the snowbirds, and then go back north to whatever club he was at, whether it was Appowamus or Baltusrol or the Philadelphia Cricket Club. He was at the top clubs, so he was definitely expected or well known. But his livelihood came not just from playing golf, but from making golf clubs and teaching, and making golf balls. But not so much by the time you get to over 1900 with the Haskell.
I was reading let's go back to his formative years. I was reading where he was a licensed caddy, and he had a real love for the game, and that love led to him not being welcome in school because he was toting around golf clubs. What did you have to do to become a licensed caddy? And tell me about his formative years and where that love for the game came from.
Well, if you're familiar at all with the east coast of Scotland, which, I spent 21 years in St. Andrews, so I can speak from knowledge. It pervades just about everything. And when you're talking about North Berwick, you've got Gullen, you've got Dalmahoy, you've got Muirfield, you've got Musselburgh. Some of the greatest golf courses in the world are within a 15-mile radius of where he grew up. And of course, at that time, it was not unusual for young boys to go to work at a very, very early age to support the family. And so he, now remember, his dad was also a golf pro, as was his older brother.
Right.
Tom Jr. So they were already in the game, and so he just kind of, I guess you would just say he was born to the game and born into the game. So he caddied at North Berwick. As you say, he became licensed at age 11. Then he was apprenticed to a club maker, which again, for a golf professional, that's where your money is made. And then somehow he got the attention of somebody in Rhode Island who brought him over and gave him his first job as a pro at a golf club in Rhode Island.
Now, a lot of other golfers from the same region also came over here. Why was that? Why did everybody come over here?
Well, for 2 reasons. One, economics, and 2, it being the brand new pastime in the United States. Like I say, it really took off around 1890, and you have a lot. Most of the touring pro, Harry Vardon came over. He won the U.S. Open in 1900, his only one. But he was sponsored by a golf club company to come do a tour and put on exhibitions. The game was really beginning to grow. There were no American-born golf professionals at that time, so they had to come from somewhere. And Scotland, the home of golf, which is where the game all began, saw a real financial opportunity to pursue their life dream and their goals. And so you had pros coming from Carnoustie, a lot from St. Andrews, from North Berwick, from Edinburgh, from Perth, all making their way to the United States because there were clubs springing up everywhere, and they needed pros. They needed somebody to teach their members how to play golf, and these were the Scots in particular.
And he really knew how to play. In fact, in 1902, he became the first player to hold 2 major championships here in the United States at the same time. He was already the U.S. Open winner, and as you had mentioned earlier, the Western Open was, I guess, considered a major.
It was.
Yeah. So he held both of them at the same time. He also became the first golfer to break 300 for 72 holes. How was golf perceived back then, and what kind of fame and or notoriety did he have?
Well, in the golfing world, and certainly among the elite, the golf clubs, they knew who he was. Baltusrol hired him as their head pro. Now, Baltusrol is one of the top clubs in the country, but they hired him in 1998. He'd only been in the United States for 2 years. So apparently his reputation had already spread to such that he caught the attention of a good number of golf clubs. Like I say, he ended up at the Philadelphia Cricket Club, which again is an outstanding U.S. Open venue. So he had made an immediate reputation, played a lot of exhibition matches, played a lot with Alex Smith, the fellow who came in second in 1901 and again in 1905 to him. They were good buddies. And they traveled around doing exhibitions. As a matter of fact, when they went out to win the Western Open, they did a whole series of exhibition matches out in California. So they're trotting around. I mean, he was not someone who stayed at his own club and stayed in the pro shop. He was out playing matches. He was out getting out and about, and people recognized him and saw him. And when they saw him play, they said, "Here is as good a golfer as ever lived." And in the United States context, he was the best, period.
As we said, he'd beat Alex Smith in 1901, finished his second in 1902. In 1903, he beat David Brown in a playoff. He won by 5 strokes over Gilbert Nicklaus in 1904. And then he returned to myopia in 1905 to once again beat Alex Smith.
That's right.
Talk about his dominance in the U.S. Open during that period and the competition he faced, and the fact that, from what I read, he was extremely accurate. And if you think in the sense of the U.S. Open today, accuracy is truly what wins that tournament.
Well, that's right. I mean, the U.S. Open traditionally has made sure that the fairways are tight, except for Aaron Hill's this past U.S. Open championship. Rough is just that, and you've got to be accurate. You've got to be in the fairway, and that's one thing about Willie Anderson. He was long, he was straight, but he was accurate. And and when you're playing with hickories, if you miss hit with a hickory club, it's liable to go anywhere. I know because I still play hickories. And
you still play hickories?
Oh yeah. Oh, I love hickory golf. Yeah. I mean, of course, I play with modern clubs as well. But whenever I've got 2 sets of hickories that are over 100 years old. That would be contemporary to Willie Anderson.
And it's a different golf swing.
Well, it is. It's as Bobby Jones says, wait for it. You bring it back, you hesitate a little bit, and then you come through the ball. And a lot of people nowadays, when they swing hickories, they think they're going to break the club. No, you're not going to break the club. It's very pliable, and so you can hit. But the thing is, if you miss hit, you really miss hit. And then if you're playing with the gutties, it's easy for them to get out of shape. You hit them a few times, they'll put a few nicks in there and get a little misshapen. Or if you ever play with a balata ball, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
You miss hit one of those, you get a little smiley face in the cover. Well, gutties didn't quite do that until the Haskell. But they were not always in the round, as we say. So you've got to be one who can acclimate and adjust your game according to both the ball and the club. Not so much the course, but the ball and the club. And, of course, Willie was one of those who was an expert at that.
Well, this leads me into my next set of questions, and it's a thrill to know that you actually do play hickory-shafted clubs, because you look at today's game and the fact that a guy like this year's U.S. Open champion, Brooks Koepka, hit a 3-wood 379 yards and reached a 681-yard hole with a 3-wood and an iron, and compare it to the way Anderson played golf, it's a totally different game. These are 2 different games. Tell me about the game of golf back in the early 1900s. The equipment used, the course conditions were significantly different too.
Oh, yeah.
How different was it to the game that we see and we play today?
Well, let me preface that a little bit because, before the gutty balls, which are, a resin-type, rubber-type ball, there was the feathery. And of course, all the clubs then were very slim and low hickory shafted with persimmon heads. And you could hit the ball, if you're a good golfer, even with the gutties, if you're a good golfer, maybe 170 yards off the tee. However, the longest recorded drive with a feathery was 1836, September, the Old Course St. Andrews, 14th hole, 361 yards.
Wow.
With a feathery using a wooden shafted and wooden headed club.
Wow.
I might say that the weather might have been blowing what we say is blowing a hoolie. Strong winds, and late September, the ground might have been a little hard, but still 361 yards. But it is a completely different game because you have to, I think, in especially around the turn of the century when Willie was playing, it was all about course management, strategy. How do you play? How do you need to get here? And if you look at the golf courses that were built at the time in the golden age of golf course architect, it was Donald Ross, Seth Rayner, these guys, A.W. Tillinghast. You start looking at their courses, they design courses so that there are multiple approaches, multiple ways to play a hole. And so it was all about course management and that, because, if I know I can only hit a drive 170 yards, maybe 200 yards on a good day, and if I'm hitting a 9-iron, of course, at that time we're talking a niblick. If I can hit a niblick 80 yards, then, okay, I need to look at the golf course and see how I need to position myself. And so it's more strategic than it is about bombing. You can bomb the ball nowadays, and of course they keep the rough so narrow normally, except for the U.S. Opens, that you can play the ball, and with the wedges you can play the ball from anywhere. But then the fairways were not that smooth. The greens certainly were not rolling like they are today.
Some greens didn't even have grass on them. They were sand greens.
With oil.
They should have been called sand.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They were. Matter of fact, Hale Irwin said he learned to play on sand greens where they put a little oil just to keep the sand down.
Wow.
But those are nice and smooth. I will say that. But you have to. Well, here in the museum, we've got a replica of a green from about 1900, and we have some Haskell golf balls, and we have hickory clubs that our guests can use to see exactly what it was like. And they're amazed at how smooth it comes off the face of the club, for one thing. But then to see it roll and take a sharp left or a sharp right or stop, they said, whoa. And it just lets you know just how good these guys had to be to play the way they did, because it was nothing like it is today.
So where Willie learned in North Berwick compared to what he found here, were the courses similar? Were the conditions similar? How did the courses differ from there to here during the days of Willie Anderson?
Okay, well, Willie Anderson, coming from North Berwick, and I don't know if you've ever been over to Scotland, or certainly played on the links courses over there.
Someday.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad to say the Old Course in St. Andrews is my home course. I've played it a lot.
A great place to call your home course.
It is, but links courses are by the seaside, usually on the arable land, between the ground between the coast and the arable land. So it's always rough. It's always windblown. Very, very few trees. A lot of sand, and so the turf would be tough, but it'd also be very low in the sense because of windswept and usually grazed by sheep. To be honest with you, and then you get over to America where you've got parkland courses. So you got a lot of trees. You got a different type of grass altogether. So it would be, extremely difficult to make an adjustment. I always look at it this way because I love links golf. Links golf is bump and run. You can run it up. You have to play it low under the wind. What we would call in Tiger Woods parlance, stingers. You hit a lot of stingers.
Sure.
Whereas American golf, especially for parkland courses, is more like target golf. You hit, you expect the ball to stop and sit on the green. It didn't do that, certainly in Scotland. So for these guys coming over here, it's like Phil Mickelson. Phil said he had to learn how to play links golf, and it took him a few years before he finally won the Open and the Scottish Open. But it took him a while to learn how to play a different style of game altogether. Well, that's what Willie Anderson and all these guys coming over. But I will say this, these guys who were coming over were also ones who designed golf courses. I mean, Willie Anderson designed a couple of golf courses.
Interesting.
So it would go back to their knowledge, but you have to look at the lay of the land. But completely different game.
You know, there was a time, even during the time of Byron Nelson and Ben Hogan, where they were club professionals when they weren't out on tour. But a lot of times they were just club professionals in name. It was a great honor for a club to say so-and-so is the head professional here. But I don't think that's the way it was when Willie Anderson was playing. He truly had to work at that club to earn a living. Why is it, and you mentioned it back when we started the interview, that he was the head professional at several clubs. Why is it that he moved around so much?
Well, that's kind of one of the anomalies that we really don't know, other than he was in great demand. Everybody wanted him, because he was the U.S. Open champion, for one thing, which is the national championship. But two, his style, although he never produced like Byron Nelson or Ben Hogan, golf instructional books, he was well known as a good teacher. And so he would go to a club, and of course, if another club came along and said, "Look, we will pay you more," and bear in mind that both his father and his older brother came over, and they were club professionals. So it was kind of a family industry, as it were. But no, they had they made their living not playing golf. They made their living selling golf clubs, making golf clubs, and teaching members how to play. So I would imagine that he had roaming feet, for one thing, because he liked to travel quite a lot.
Sure.
But also had to go where the money was.
And speaking of going to where the money was, as you said earlier, they didn't win a lot of money on the pro tour. So he played in a lot of exhibitions. How common were exhibitions back then, and just how much money could a guy win for taking home top prize?
Well, much like it is today, you have two aspects for the money. One is certainly the purse, which was not very much because most clubs couldn't afford to put a lot of money up for that, because the tournaments were run pretty much by the individual golf clubs. But a lot came on the side bets. Their sponsors would put money on them, and they'd get a proportion of their backers, as it were. So that was important, and it's always been that way. But again, bear in mind, at the time Willie Anderson was coming along, amateurs were the elite of golf, not the pros. The pros were considered the working men who filled the gap of teaching us how to play, and they would have their tournaments. So when you had the first U.S. Open, actually it was on the back of the first U.S. Amateur. So the professionals were kind of second tier initially, certainly when Willie played. And it wasn't until you have Gene Sarris and Walter Hagen come along and kind of elevate the status of the professional game. And of course, Bobby Jones had a lot to do with that, but he's remained amateur, as you know.
Sure.
But it wasn't until Gene Sarris and Walter Hagen and that group came on that the professionals began to overtake the status of the amateur. So he was always in the shadows so far as elite golf goes. But if they ever needed a pro, or if they needed somebody to teach them how to play and to be there, that was Willie Anderson.
So he won, the U.S. Open 4 times. He won the Western Open 4 times. How dominant was he on the pro tour? And what were some of the other tournaments he competed in and won? How dominant was Willie Anderson?
Well, like I say, most other than, like I said, the U.S. Open and the Western Open, he did play in the Florida Open, and he did play in a few of the others. But by and large, he did dominate. I mean, that's simply put. At the time, there wasn't the first known, or arguably the first American-born golf professional was a fellow by the name of John Shippen up at Shinnecock Hills, and he was African American. But all the other players pretty much exclusively on the professional side, were Scots and Englishmen. Very, very few Americans in there. You had C.B. McDonald from Chicago, who, because of him, pretty much started the USGA. He was American, but he had spent time in St. Andrews with old and young Tom Morris, and came back and built Chicago Golf Club, as you know. But he stayed amateur. He was always amateur. So in the pro ranks, it was exclusively Scots and Englishmen who had come over to play. So they were playing with guys they knew by and large. Not that many Americans until Johnny McDermott, 1911 and 1912 U.S. Opens. He won both of those, and he was an American player.
You know, he led a great life on the course, and he enjoyed a good time off it. Unfortunately, though, it didn't last very long. He passed away at the young age of 31. A lot of different theories on what happened to him, from epilepsy to alcoholism to a brain tumor. But in the end, I believe the official cause of death was ALS.
That's right.
Could you talk about his last years? I heard, read where he really was suffering.
He was, but he didn't let on. I mean, I think that's to his credit. He did suffer quite a lot. He off the course, like I say, on the course he was very focused. Off the course, he was known to be very convivial, jolly, liked to drink, like his tipple. A bit unconventional by and large, but in his latter years, he I don't want to say he suffered in silence, because he actually continued to compete pretty much right up until he died, and that's why there's so much controversy, because it wasn't a lingering death in that sense, of him really being sick and then being around. He competed, didn't finish some competitions, but that's why you say, well, some was arterial sclerosis or epilepsy or alcoholism, because he did like his tipple, or brain tumor, because it was he didn't let on just how sick he really was, and so he in essence suffered it out. And for that, you have to, I want to say, maybe give him a little credit, because he didn't share his illness with anybody.
Always a shame when someone goes that young. It's incredible. And, back then, we didn't know a whole lot about arterial sclerosis. Heck, we didn't know a lot about it when, Lou Gehrig passed away.
That's right. Lou Gehrig, that's right. Well, it's something, because, Alex Smith said that, had he lived, there's no question that he would have won more U.S. Opens than anybody ever living, and it would have never been matched. And, he might be on to something there.
Yeah, he almost won 5 in a row.
That's right. That's exactly right.
He did win 4, though, and yet when we talk about the greats of the game, from Jones and Sarazen to Nelson and Hogan to Palmer and Nicklaus and Woods, we barely utter the name Willie Anderson. Why is that? And just how important is Willie Anderson to the history of golf?
Well, he set the standard, and that's about the best way we can leave it. He set the standard for what it meant to be a U.S. Open champion.
Is there anything else we should know about Willie Anderson?
Well, I think there's one little thing that's kind of unique and kind of fun. At the 1903 U.S. Open at Baltusrol, of course, Willie played and he won, but his father and his brother also played in that championship. So that's the only time we know that father, son, and son played in a U.S. Open championship or in a major. Now, we do know old and young Tom Morris, 1868.
Right.
Young Tom, old Tom was in second. But 1903 U.S. Open, Baltusrol, Willie and his father and brother, Tom Sr. and Tom Jr., all three played in that one championship. And I think it's pretty cool.
It definitely is. Tony, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
Think about it for a moment. If there was a golfer today who went out and won 3 straight U.S. Open championships, think about the magnitude of such an achievement. Yet, when the name Willie Anderson is mentioned, so few know who he is or have ever even heard of him. I guess we were still in our infancy as a nation to revere sports heroes like we do today. How else can you explain it? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. For more about Sports Forgotten Heroes, please visit our website, sportsfh.com. There you can find out more about Willie Anderson, check out past podcasts, and see who we have lined up for future podcasts. You can also find out how to ask a question of a future guest or learn how to support the show, and we can sure use your support. Next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we'll look back at the career of the all-time home run leader for the San Diego Padres. And no, it wasn't Dave Winfield. It's Nate Colbert. Thanks again to today's guest, Tony Parker. And for more information about the World Golf Hall of Fame and Museum, visit worldgolfhalloffame.org. That's worldgolfhalloffame.org. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.